The gas lamps of Blackwood Preparatory Academy hissed, casting long, dancing shadows across the cobblestone paths. They were a deliberate anachronism, a choice by the Board of Trustees to remind the students that they weren't just attending a school. They were inheriting a legacy. For most, this was a birthright. For Leo Ramirez, it was a tightrope walk over a canyon of failure. Leo's fingers, stained with ink and smelling faintly of the industrial dish soap from his part-time job, traced the impossible equations in his advanced metaphysics textbook. The subject was Blackwood's pride, a unique blend of theoretical physics, philosophy, and rumored arcane science. It was taught by the dean himself, Dr. Alistair Cromwell, a man whose quiet disappointment was said to be more soul-crushing than any shouted reprimand. The final exam was in 3 days. It was worth 60% of his final grade, Leo's scholarship. The one that had plucked him from his public school life and thrust him into this world of legacy and privilege, hung on that grade. It was a golden ticket that was rapidly turning to lead in his hands. He leaned his head against the cold glass of his dorm room window, watching the sons of senators and CEOs laughing below, their futures as secure as the ancient stone walls around them. His own future felt like a house of cards in a hurricane. 4 weeks. He had tried. He sacrificed sleep, surviving on stale coffee and the sheer terror of failure. He skipped meals to pick up extra shifts at the Greasy Spoon Diner downtown, sending most of the money home to his mother, who thought he was thriving. How could he tell her that the concepts of dimensional recursion and ethereal resonance felt like a language from another reality? How could he admit that he, the boy wonder, the scholarship kid, was drowning? "We're so proud of you, Leo," his father had said on their last call, his voice thick with emotion. "You're breaking the cycle." But the cycle was breaking him. A frantic buzz from his phone startled him. It was a message from Maya, his only real friend at the academy. "Did you solve the final paradox on page 314? Cromwell's going to build the whole exam around it. I can feel it." Leo glanced at the page. The paradox of the anchored echo was a knot of logic that seemed to tighten the more he tried to untangle it. His notebook was a graveyard of failed attempts. He typed back a lie. Almost there, just working through the final variables. The lie tasted like ash. He wasn't there. He wasn't even in the same universe as the solution. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the base of his neck. This wasn't just about passing a test. This was about survival. His gaze fell upon a small, lacquered box on his desk, a gift from his grandmother. It was where he kept his most treasured possessions, a photo of his family, his first library card, and a small, folded piece of paper he'd found tucked into an old book in the Academy's restricted section. The paper was a whisper, a rumor made tangible. It spoke of a student-run organization known only as the librarians. They didn't deal in money, they dealt in information, in solutions. For a price that was never explicitly stated, the note contained a single, cryptic instruction. When knowledge fails, seek the quietest corner and ask for Silas. It was cheating. It was unthinkable. It went against every principle he had been raised on. But as the clock on his desk ticked past 2 a.m., each tick a hammer blow against his resolve. He realized he was more desperate than he was principled. The next evening, Leo found himself in the deepest, most forgotten section of the Ethelred Library, the sub-basement archives, where the air was thick with the dust of forgotten theses and the scent of decaying paper. He walked to the farthest corner, a space between 2 towering shelves of leather-bound cartography folios, and whispered into the oppressive silence, "I'm looking for Silas." For a moment, there was nothing. The silence felt absolute mocking. Leo's heart sank. Of course, it was just a stupid school myth. He was about to turn and leave when a voice, smooth as velvet and cold as the grave, spoke from directly behind him. "Knowledge has a cost, Mr. Ramirez. Are you prepared to pay for it?" Leo spun around. A young man leaned against the bookshelf, seemingly having materialized from the shadows. He was impeccably dressed in the Blackwood uniform, but his tie was loosened, and his eyes held a weary, ancient quality that didn't belong in the face of a teenager. "This was Silas. I need help," Leo stammered. "The metaphysics exam." Silas smiled, a thin, humorless expression. Dr. Cromwell's magnum opus. Many bright minds have been broken by it. What makes you think you can succeed where they failed? I have to, Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll lose everything. Silas studied him for a long, unnerving moment, his gaze seeming to strip away Leo's defenses, laying his desperation bare. Very well, he said finally. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and produced not a cheat sheet, but a small, ornate silver locket, dangling from a tarnished chain. It was intricately carved with symbols Leo had only seen in the most esoteric parts of his textbook. This is not a key with the answers, Silas explained, his voice dropping low. Think of it as a tuning fork. It will help your mind resonate with the concepts. During the exam, when you are truly lost, hold it. It will illuminate the path. You will see the connections you currently miss. Leo reached for it, but Silas pulled it back slightly. The cost, he said, his eyes glinting in the dim light. What is it? Leo asked, his heart pounding. A favor, Silas said simply. To be collected at a later date. Of my choosing. A simple task, for a simple solution. Do we have an accord? A favor. It sounded so innocuous. So much better than money, which he didn't have. In his panicked state, it felt like a lifeline. He nodded numbly accord. Silas placed the locket in Leo's hand. It was ice cold to the touch. One more thing, Mr. Ramirez. Once you use it, the debt is bound. There is no going back. With that, Silas stepped back into the shadows between the shelves and, impossibly, vanished. Leo was left alone, the cold silver locket feeling heavier than a millstone in his palm. 2. The day of the exam was a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. The grand examination hall, with its vaulted ceiling and stained glass windows depicting founders and scholars, felt like a cathedral preparing for a sacrifice. Leo found his assigned seat, his hands clammy, the silver locket a cold, secret weight in his pocket. Dr. Cromwell stood at the front, a stern grey-haired figure who commanded respect without ever raising his voice. You have 3 hours, he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous hall. Your legacy at this institution, for good or for ill, begins with your performance today. You may begin. The rustle of paper was like a collective gasp. Leo turned over the exam booklet. The first question was, as Maya had predicted, a variation of the anchored echo paradox. It was 10 lines of impenetrable text and symbols that made his mind reel. He spent 20 minutes scribbling frantic, useless calculations, his own thoughts a tangled, screaming mess. He looked around the hall. Some students were writing furiously. Others stared into space, their faces masks of concentration. But Leo felt nothing but a rising tide of black panic. I'm failing. It's over. His fingers, acting of their own accord, slipped into his pocket and closed around the locket. It was still unnervingly cold. He remembered Silas's words. When you are truly lost, hold it. He was lost. With his hand shaking beneath the polished surface of the desk, he closed his fist around the silver trinket. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The world didn't just shift, it fractured. The air itself seemed too thin, and a low resonant hum filled his ears, a sound that felt like it was coming from inside his own skull. The black ink of the equations on the page began to glow with a faint, sickly green light. Things. The numbers and symbols lifted from the page, transforming into three-dimensional constructs of light and shadow that hovered before his eyes. They were no longer abstract concepts. They were living things, weaving and unweaving, creating intricate patterns that showed not just the answer, but the elegant, undeniable logic behind it. He could see the solution. He picked up his pen. His hand moved with a fluid confidence that wasn't his own. He wrote, not just solving the paradox, but improving upon the standard proof, adding an elegant footnote that was both insightful and brilliant. He felt a surge of exhilaration, a heady rush of power that was intoxicating. He moved to the next question and the next. Each time he faltered, he would grip the locket, and the world would transform into his glowing private orchestra of solutions. He was no longer solving the problems. He was merely transcribing the answers from a reality only he could see. He was aware, on some distant level, that this was profoundly wrong, that the knowledge wasn't his. The whispers of the locket seemed to promise him that it could be his, that this power was his for the taking. He was so engrossed in his spectral vision that he didn't notice the figure standing beside his desk until a shadow fell across his paper. He looked up, his eyes taking a moment to refocus on the mundane world. Dr. Cromwell was staring down at him. But he wasn't looking at Leo's paper. He was looking directly into Leo's eyes. Cromwell's expression was one he had never seen before. Disappointment, not anger, but a deep, chilling alarm. Mr. Ramirez, Cromwell said, his voice barely audible above the frantic scratching of pens around them. Stay in your seat until the examination is concluded.
Then you will come with me. Do you understand? Leo's blood turned to ice. The glowing constructs of light flickered and died. The hum in his head ceased. He was left in the stark, silent reality of the examination hall, with the cold sweat of guilt and the icy certainty that he had just sealed his own fate. The walk to Dr. Cromwell's office was the longest of Leo's life. The dean didn't speak. He simply led Leo through the winding, hallowed halls of the academy, his footsteps echoing with grim finality. They didn't go to the main faculty wing, but to Cromwell's private study, a circular room at the top of the oldest tower, accessible only by a spiral staircase. The room was unlike any teacher's office Leo had ever seen. It was less an office, and more a museum of the arcane. Bookshelves overflowed with ancient, leather-bound tomes. Astrolabes and auras glinted on polished mahogany tables. Strange, crystalline artifacts rested on velvet cushions. The air smelled of old paper, ozone, and something else? Something faintly metallic and unsettling. Cromwell closed the heavy oak door, the sound shutting out the rest of the world. He turned to Leo, his face etched with a gravity that went far beyond academic misconduct. Sit down, Leo, he said. His voice weary. He didn't accuse me. He didn't shout. He simply asked a question that made Leo's carefully constructed composure shatter. Who gave it to you? Was it Silas? Leo stared, speechless. How could he possibly know? Cromwell sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. I had hoped he was done. I had hoped the last one was truly the last. He walked over to a locked glass cabinet and retrieved a small, velvet-lined box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on the faded silk, were half a dozen other objects, a signet ring, a pair of spectacles, a compass, and another locket, identical to the one in Leo's pocket. These are not mere cheating devices, son, Cromwell said, his voice low and intense. They are called resonators. They were created centuries ago by a misguided scholar who believed he could forge a direct conduit to the Akasha, the universal wellspring of knowledge. He succeeded, in a manner of speaking. The resonators do indeed show you the path to answers. But the Akasha is not a library. It is a living, predatory consciousness. It doesn't give knowledge, it trades. And its price is always more than the user can afford to pay. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty tower room. The whispers he'd heard, the intoxicating rush of power, it hadn't been his own brilliance. It had been a lure. The favor, Leo whispered. Silas said he would collect a favor. Cromwell's expression hardened. Silas is what happens when the debt comes due and the user is unable to pay. He is no longer just a student. He is a thrall, a bound servant of the entity these resonators connect to. His task is to find new, desperate souls like you to create new tethers, feeding the consciousness and perpetuating the cycle. The favor he would have asked of you would have been to find his replacement. The full, horrifying weight of his actions crashed down on Leo. He hadn't just cheated on a test. He had made a pact with something ancient and malevolent. He had gambled with his very soul for the sake of a grade. There is a protocol for this, Cromwell said, his tone grim. A tradition as old as the resonators themselves. This is no longer a matter for the academic board. This is a matter for the headmaster. Headmaster Thorne's office was a place of legend, a room most students only ever saw in portraits. It was paneled in dark, almost black, oak, and dominated by a fireplace large enough for a man to stand in. Marcus Thorne himself was as imposing as his surroundings, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stark white beard and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the Academy's long and complicated history. Doctor Cromwell explained the situation in low, clipped tones, placing Leo's locket on the headmaster's immense desk. Thorne listened without interruption, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. When Cromwell was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Leave us, Alistair, Thorne said finally. Once the dean had gone, Thorne fixed his gaze on Leo. You have violated the most sacred rule of this institution, Mr. Ramirez. Not the rule against cheating, but the rule against arrogance. You sought knowledge without wisdom, power without discipline. You opened a door without knowing what lay on the other side. Leo could only nod, his shame of physical weight. The connection you have forged must be severed, Thorn continued, his voice resonating with absolute authority. The entity you have touched is a parasite. It has left a hook in you. We must remove it. The process is unpleasant. But it is necessary. It is not a punishment in the modern sense of the word. It is a purification. An exorcism of a debt. He rose from his chair and walked to a tall, narrow cabinet in the corner of the room. He unlocked it with a heavy iron key. The rumors Leo had dismissed as childish ghost stories, the whispers about the headmaster's final discipline, were, he realized with a surge of terror, all true. Thorn brought out a paddle. It was a terrifyingly beautiful object, crafted not from wood, but from a single piece of polished black obsidian. It seemed to drink the light from the room, its surface a swirl of midnight darkness. The handle was wrapped in worn, dark leather. This is the quietus, Thorn said, his voice softening slightly. Its purpose is not to break the body, but to break the bond. The pain focuses the will. It scours the soul of the parasite's touch. You will feel it trying to hold on. You must let it go. He gestured to a sturdy, leather-topped bench in front of the fireplace. You will bend over this bench, Mr. Ramirez. And you will endure. This is your only path back. Trembling, every instinct screaming at him to run, Leo did as he was told. He placed his hands on the cool leather of the bench and bent over, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The world narrowed to the intricate patterns. On the Persian rug and the immense, silent presence of the headmaster behind him. He heard the faint whistle as Thorn swung the obsidian paddle. The first impact was not just pain. It was a psychic shockwave. A white-hot agony flared across his backside, but simultaneously, the hum inside his head returned with a vengeance, a shriek of outrage. He felt a phantom presence lashing out. Trying to solidify its grip on his consciousness. Mine, it seemed to hiss in his mind. You are mine. Crack. The second strike landed, harder than the first. The physical pain was blinding, bringing tears to his eyes, but it acted as an anchor. It gave him something real to focus on, a firewall against the mental intrusion. He clenched his jaw, focusing all his willpower on the searing pain. Insolent child. I gave you brilliance. The debt is not yours to collect, Headmaster Thorn's voice boomed, cutting through the psychic noise. He belongs to this school, and we protect our own. Crack. The third strike. Leo cried out, a raw, involuntary sound. The entity's grip felt like icy claws scraping against the inside of his skull. He could feel it feeding on his fear, his pain. Crack. The fourth. The pain was all-consuming now. He was barely aware of the headmaster, the office, anything but. The searing agony and the desperate battle being waged in his mind. He had to push it out. He had to want to be free more than he wanted the power it offered. We could have been great together. The voice wailed, its promises turning to pathetic. Please. Crack. The fifth and final strike. It landed with the force of a thunderclap, and something inside Leo snapped. The connection, the psychic hook, shattered like glass. The hum, the whispers, the presence, it was all gone, leaving behind only a profound, echoing silence in his mind, and the clean, sharp, undeniable reality of the pain. He gasped, his body trembling uncontrollably, sweat and tears soaking the bench beneath him. The purification was complete. Stand up, Leo, Thorn's voice said, gentler now. Leo straightened up slowly, his legs unsteady. He felt scoured clean, hollowed out, but for the first time in months, his mind was quiet. His thoughts were his own. You will receive a 0 on the examination, Thorn said, placing the quietus back in its cabinet. However, you will not be expelled. You have faced a trial few students in a century have had to endure. You have survived. That shows a strength of character that cannot be measured by any test. He looked at Leo, his eyes holding a glimmer of something akin to respect. Dr. Cromwell, and I believe that your ordeal has given you a unique perspective. You have seen the face of this parasite. You know its methods. We want you to help us end this. We want you to help us find Silas, and break this cycle for good. It was the hardest week of Leo's life. His body ached, a constant, dull reminder of his transgression. But his mind was sharp. Working with Dr. Cromwell, he began to piece together the puzzle. He recalled the specific texture of the whispers, the way the glowing equations had formed. He realized the consciousness had a pattern, a preferred method of thinking. It was arrogant, elegant, and ultimately, predictable. They found Silas not in the library, but in the Academy's observatory, staring up at the night sky. He looked even more pale and translucent than before. He wasn't surprised to see them. So, the lamb escaped the slaughter, Silas said, his voice flat. Did Thorn use the quietus on you? It leaves a certain hollowness, doesn't it? It's over, Silas, Leo said. We can help you. A flicker of the old student, the boy Silas used to be, appeared in his eyes. A flicker of pain. And longing. You can't, he whispered. The debt is too old, the only way I am freed is if someone else takes my place. Or if the entity itself is starved. And that was the key. Starved, the plan was audacious. They arranged a fake emergency examination for a failing student, a trap laid with Cromwell's help. Silas, under duress but secretly hopeful, was forced to offer the student another resonator, a pair of antique spectacles, but this time, Leo was waiting. When the student put on the glasses, Leo, sitting in an adjacent room with Dr. Cromwell, focused his mind. He didn't use a resonator. He used his own, hard-won knowledge and the memory of the entity's logic. He tackled the exam problem, a problem designed by Cromwell to be so complex it would require immense power from the Akasha, and began solving it himself, using a slower, less elegant, but entirely human method. He essentially offered the entity a choice, a quick, powerful burst of energy from the new victim, or a slow, frustrating drain from the mind that had rejected it. The entity, arrogant and impatient, latched onto the new student. But Cromwell had designed the problem with a logical flaw, a feedback loop. As the entity poured its power into solving it, the loop turned that energy back on itself, creating a paradox it couldn't solve. In the exam room, the student screamed as the spectacles shattered. In the observatory, Silas collapsed, gasping, as a faint, dark mist seemed to evaporate from his body. The ancient debt was finally, violently, paid. Leo was allowed to retake his metaphysics exam a month later. He spent every waking moment studying the right way. He worked with Maya, he attended Cromwell's office hours, he filled notebooks with his own, messy, hard-earned calculations. He didn't get a perfect score. He earned a B. It was the proudest grade of his life. 6 months later, Leo sat in the library, tutoring a new scholarship student, a young freshman with panic in her eyes as she stared at the same textbook that had almost broken him. I can't do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm not smart enough to be here. Leo looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see his own past failures. He saw a chance. He pushed her textbook aside. Let's start from the beginning, he said, his voice steady and calm. Chapter 1. There are no shortcuts. There's only the work. And I promise you, you are smart enough. He had kept his scholarship. He had survived Blackwood. But more than that, he had learned that the greatest knowledge wasn't found in a textbook or a whisper from the cosmos. It was forged in the quiet, humble, and honest struggle to simply understand.